Windows Phone, and now here are all the different templates that I could use for a Windows Phone application. So say I want to do a pivot app. I'll say OK. Well, what platform? Is it Windows Phone 8 or is it 7.1? I'm going to choose Windows Phone 8. Say OK. And right there in that window, you can see there's this is the XAML, which is defining the layout. Here is the WYSIWYG editor, so I can see exactly what it looks like. And if I wanted to see, wanted to dive into the code, I could open up a source file and dive in. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So what you're seeing here is we're emulating the phone. So you get it's actually running as a virtual machine, and it's running the Windows Phone operating system, and but it's fully integrated, so I can actually test it. There, I can test it with touch. I can test it with the mouse. And there are also some additional things I can do, let's say like pivot. So if you wanted to make sure that your application would respond to the user, putting the device into landscape mode, make sure the user interface responded to that, you could test that. Any questions so far? Go ahead.
So if I do an application with those like tiles that, but I want to also make an iPhone application, like will those effects be like preserved if I turn that into the App Store?
Right. So the question is, if I'm targeting the Windows platform and take advantage of some of the things that differentiate the app on Windows, the tiles and search and share, and those things aren't available on the other platforms. How do you plan for that? How do you deal with that? So later in the talk, I'll inform you on all the different ways you can build cross-platform apps and games. But one of the things that you learn is that, especially in the area of apps, is the one thing you can't really replicate going from one platform to the other is the user experience, is the UI. So the first step in your architecture is separation of concerns. That's where Model View Controller comes in, or MVVC as MVVM, I'm sorry, that we promote. The whole idea is separating the UI layout, UI logic, middle tier logic, data access. Make sure you've got good separation in your code. Because when you go to do something in a cross-platform project, not all your code can go cross-platform. Typically what you have is you try to target the majority of your logic that's not user interface related. That can be cross-platform. You try to choose a language that will get you cross-platform. That's the other thing you have to look at. But typically you'll do unique UI implementations on every platform because each one has their own controls, their own idiosyncrasies, their own features that you're going to want to leverage. So great question.
So it's no, right?
Yeah, the short answer was no. The shorter answer is, well, it's like anything else in, been doing this a while. The classic consulting answer is it depends. That's how you start answering any of those questions, right? So you can take that as a skill and put that on your resume. You know how to say it depends. It just buys you time as you're trying to come up with the answer. So if you're ever in a consulting situation, you could start there. Yes?
How can you, so say you want to make like an app for like the Windows Phone, you can really use like a compass for the Windows 8. Can you use it? How would you go about doing it in Windows Phone? As far as like gestures, not really gestures, but more or less just like compass.
Right. So both Windows 8 and Windows Phone have support for sensors, for obviously touch. and dealing with accelerometers and gyroscopes, cameras. Those APIs exist. When you start to get into that part of the API, that's probably where the majority of differences are between developing for Windows 8 and developing for Windows Phone, is when you start to get into hardware-specific areas like that. A large percentage of the capabilities between Windows 8 and Windows Phone are shared. There's a shared core, which I believe is a good lead into my next slide. Between Windows 8 and Windows Phone, there's a shared core. Probably gets you about 80% commonality. But when you get into things that are specific to the hardware, it's just going to be different. You know, how you deal with an accelerometer on in the Windows Phone space, where that's dealing with phones from Nokia and HTC and other phone manufacturers. And then, you know, on Windows, yes, we have a camera, we have sensor support and so on. A whole nother set of hardware vendors. We try to abstract as much as possible, but that's sort of where the differences lie. So, again, separation of concerns is key. When you're designing the implementation, that's the kind of thing you want to encapsulate away into a class library. Make sure it's something that's architecturally a little more plug and play. Yeah.
You showed shortly that you made an HTML5 JavaScript app with Visual Studio, I think.
Yes.
What about if you come the other way? You have a web app, you build it in Chrome, have your JavaScript frameworks and everything. How hard is it to get that?
It's a great question. So the question is, if I'm already have an app for the browser, and I'm using, let's say, jQuery and maybe some other JavaScript libraries, can I get that to run on Windows 8? The answer is yes. It's there. Well, I should have started, it depends. But the true answer is yes, it will work. Is it going to be just move your code over and hit run and it goes? No. So what you're going to need to do is first determine any third-party JavaScript libraries you're using. Do they work on Windows 8? Most do. jQuery, as an example, just works. If you want to use jQuery for doing AJAX calls, no problem. Microsoft has libraries, JavaScript libraries that you bring into your project that give you access to the WinRT APIs. So you'll need to add that into your project. You'll need to decide how do you want to, where it gets interesting is dealing with scaling your UI so that it, has the look and feel and a Chromeless function on Windows 8, right? So you might have to adjust some of your style sheets and things of that sort. How do you want to integrate with search and share? That's calling a specific Windows API. You'll do that through Microsoft's JavaScript libraries. But the third-party libraries, for the most part, we've seen that they just work. So a lot of them already tested. People are already using them. There's probably a lot of documentation on the internet how that's being used. So the story there is it's a pretty good story. In fact, a guy on my team by the name of Jesse Freeman, who's a really well known in the indie game development circles. He builds games in HTML5 and JavaScript, and he actually teaches students who want to build games in HTML5 and JavaScript. He teaches them first to build it in the browser. And then the last class, they move it over into Windows, they get it running, and they submit it to the store. So he's got it down to a science on the gaming side. You're using Canvas, or if you're using, let's say, Impact.js, or what's another one? Create.js is popular for doing HTML5 game development. They just work. So.
If I understand it correctly, it's got to be faster than PhoneGap, right? It's not just pulling in a web view, but it's really native.
It's really native. Where you would want to use PhoneGap, which is again another great choice if cross-platform mobile, if you're HTML5 and JavaScript, and you want to make sure you're going to work on all the platforms, then PhoneGap is a great choice. If you want to take your existing browser, HTML5 JavaScript browser code, and just get it running native on Windows, that's another choice. And you might decide to do that, but then use PhoneGap for iOS and Android. So These are all business decisions at some point, right? If you're in a startup, you're in a company, and they're trying to make decisions on investing time and money into building mobile applications and which platforms to support, this is exactly the conversations that go on in the design meetings. And so it's good to kind of think through those things, maybe learn all the different ways to do it as you're doing it in this class and maybe in your own copious spare time. Try out all these different approaches, and you learn a tremendous amount about what each platform can do, which each framework or tool like PhoneGap can do, where